Sometimes you listen to people speak about love and it sounds like a poem, like a sacred unfolding of souls destined to collide. But then you look closer and you actually realize it's just two dogs going at it. In this case, I guess three. Well, today we are going to unravel one of the most spiritualized performances of love I have personally seen in a while. A relationship dynamic that dresses up emotional chaos in sacred language, if you will, because I guess it hurts less. A dynamic that reframes trauma as transcendence, because I guess trauma is just too mainstream, right? And the relationship dynamic that finally interprets self-abandonment as some sort of new age evolution. Today we're talking about being chosen versus being consumed and the dangerous illusion that you're growing when in reality you're just being reshaped to fit someone else's desire. Now, I don't know if everyone knows, but this Marc person has a bit of a shady past. Yeah, and by shady past I mean that this man seems to be a pedophile. He literally assaulted a 13-year-old when he was 19. There is an interview by Dr. Phil. Doctor, right? Whatever. And Marky Boy here seems baffled at the very idea that he has done anything wrong. So I'm just mentioning it just for you guys to kind of know who this person is. And I know that many of you will be like, well, this is in his past. This is the kind of thing that we're not just gonna call it in his past. Yeah, we're not gonna do that. So this is me analyzing a first segment of this video. I don't know if I'll do the rest or not. This is pretty long and I have to say that I have a limit of bullshit intake at the end of the day. But let's see what you guys also say and we'll navigate it from there. I tried to kind of compress all the important info I gathered so far. And while I won't comment directly on Marc as a person or as a professional, I will comment on some of his ideas, of course. So let's start.
Most of the time, classical monogamy, and I say classical monogamy, is probably the best road and not a simple one. Because actually in this kind of classical monogamy vision, everyone envisions classical monogamy as this, perfect man and woman first off, right? Heteronormative.
Not necessarily, no.
That word. There's always a man and a woman. There's 4 perfect kids, incredible grandchildren. There's a philanthropic organization that they're all working in to make the world better. They have insane...
He's already trying to paint a picture that is not necessarily accurate. That might be what was historically seen as the family nucleus. But it's not necessarily what monogamy means. Monogamy means just one partner at a time, basically. Not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily imply the heteronormativity there.
Beautiful Christmas parties and Thanksgiving. They all love each other.
Or at least pictures that
are beautiful, right? Unimaginably of just like this bliss and harmony, and you can just see the picture of all of them, and everything else is somehow reaching for that. Now, Donny Osmond might have made that happen in Salt Lake City, or may not have. That's a question. But that's not actually how it works. Classical monogamy, which again I think is probably the best path for most people most of the time, is
for you normies,
holy and broken hallelujahs. And the reason why Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah has more covers made of it than any other story is because it's about, wow, love is not a victory march, right? It's a cold and it's a broken, it's a holy and broken hallelujah, right? Meaning
so correct me if I'm wrong, but that specific song talks about faith and how hard it is to, at times go through that type of journey of keeping your faith even when things are hard. In no way or shape does it mean that you're supposed to love another person in the same way that you will love your God. That in per se, if this is what we're implying here, is very dangerous. Okay, so...
simple. There's agony, there's ecstasy, there's pain, there's abandonment, there's trauma. So monogamy itself is a beautiful and gorgeous journey, which works for many people or doesn't, but it's a gorgeous, sacred possibility, which should be at the center of culture.
Why?
Beautiful.
Okay, yeah. Right there. Why should it be at the center of culture? Because somehow this kind of contradicts himself, his own idea. Like, if this is supposed to be at the center of culture, that means that somewhat this is valuable, more valuable than whatever variant he's presenting. So it's already quite confusing to me what what does this even mean? Why the contradiction? But okay.
And it's a critical and. Historically, what's happened is the way monogamy has been lived is through deception. There's actually a series of deceptions that are always at play. So, for example, right now it's about 60 to 70% in classical monogamies of people who are having sexuality of some kind that violates the agreement outside of the monogamous container. And there's a range of what that means. Does that mean cheating of this kind? Does it mean pornographic play? Does it mean emotion? Whatever it means. But basically 60 to 7% of people color outside of the lines without telling anyone, which means that there's a fundamental lack of safety in the container because there's a fundamental deception at play, which is hidden every day. And it takes an enormous amount of energy to keep hiding it because you got to keep hiding it every day. You got to keep making sure it's not discovered.
Okay.
And of course, you know about it, so you feel shamed. And your essential shame is this experience that if everybody really knew what was going on, if they really knew where my mind, heart, and body were playing, whether in the palace of the real or the palace of the imagination, they wouldn't actually love me or honor me the way they do. So therefore, I feel like a fraud. So there's an imposter phenomena. You have a place where 65 to 70% of the population of the classical, let's say, Western world for now, but it's true also in the Eastern blocs, actually live in shame.
Okay.
An essential fundamental shame, which means that we have to actually begin to deepen because a planet drenched in shame, which is the experience, not that I did something wrong, but I am wrong. Right? Not that I made a mistake, I am a mistake, right? Is a devastating planet. That's a planet which becomes rife with war, starvation, abuse.
We're going there, right?
So that's part one. That's just kind of frame one. Just have that frame. Let's just throw one more frame and then open it up and we'll weave as we go.
Okay, before we throw any frame, let's talk a little bit about the way that he's portraying monogamy because we need to really talk about a bit in depth about that. Okay, listen, we need to agree on something. I get it that they use all of this mystical, spiritual language, and I have nothing against spirituality, by the way, don't get me wrong. Psychologically speaking, faith, belief is something that the human mind needs for a variety of reasons. We're not going to discuss them in this video, but what irks me about this is that they claim to be authentic and radically honest, but then again, they're already lying because what they're practicing is something that exists already, okay? It's called polyamory. There are people who document their own experiences with it. It is known to be quite a difficult path, not impossible, but difficult. So why pretend that this is some sort of new groundbreaking concept? Well, to be honest, there are two reasons now that nobody asked. On one hand, by not calling it polyamory and instead presenting this as some sort of divine revolutionary structure, it helps them avoid associating with labels that might feel triggering or stigmatized by the wide public. This is called reframing in cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's used in this case to protect something, more specifically to protect themselves from the reality that this relationship doesn't seem to be working that well, okay? So instead it's like they just decided to rebrand it as transcendent or something like that. So follow my logic here. Admitting that they're practicing something as known, messy, and human as polyamory would collapse the illusion of uniqueness and evolution that they have built, and that would force them to confront a couple of ideas. Like the fact that their choices are driven by desire and impulse rather than destiny, and that their pain isn't sacred, it's just, consequences. These ideas might completely destroy their current narrative, which might invite in shame and pain and admitting that what they're in is a bit of a toxic cycle, eh? But, we'll expand on that later on. On the other hand, reframing polyamory as radical monogamy or whatever they call it, I don't remember, helps elevate their behavior too. You know, they literally say monogamy works for the vast majority of people, as Marc mentions. So the subtext here is that it might work for you normies out there. But then again, there are these special couples that transcend the lie of monogamy. And I'm saying the lie because he says that monogamy historically has been lived through deception, and that this constant deception creates a daily internal stress, a stress that leads to shame, and the shame that turns into imposter syndrome, shame that drenches the planet in quiet suffering. And now you hear that and it sounds almost profound, right? Until you realize, wait, this isn't an objective reflection, because here's what they're conveniently leaving out. First things first, monogamy has a high level of deception because for the past 2,000 years, it wasn't always a free choice. It was a system control. Women's sexuality was controlled to guarantee paternity and inheritance. I think we all know that. Men's resources were tied to the family unit, making them laser focused on provision instead of rebellion. I mean, in best case scenarios. So the economy was kept stable, the children traceable, and the kings unbothered by revolutions or whatnot, right? That's why cheating in this day and age makes no sense, because you can literally go into polyamory or other types of arrangements and live life in a way that feels authentic to you. Second thing is that Marc says we live in a planet drenched in shame. And to that I have to say, yes, Marc, that's how shame works. If I look you in the eyes and I say, I promise I'll be faithful to you, and then I go behind your back and break that, I should feel shame. That's what it does. It's the alarm bell, the moral compass. It's the indicator that I acted out of alignment with the contract I agreed to. It's not society being oppressive. It's me being dishonest. Now, maybe what he's really referring to is a different kind of shame, the kind that people feel when they want to live outside the norm, to explore polyamory, for instance, or non-traditional family structures or alternative forms of love. And it is true that they're met with judgment very often, with rejection or ridicule. That's real too. That kind of shame is external. It's projected onto people for being different, for challenging the dominant script, right? But let's be very clear here. That is not the same shame as the one you feel when you betray a commitment you made. One is the shame of being judged for your truth. The other is the shame of violating your own integrity. And I mean, blending the two, intentionally or not, I'm not going to assume intent here, it's pretty diabolical. It confuses accountability with oppression. It allows people to kind of frame their dishonesty as society's fault, when sometimes it's just their own avoidance of hard conversations that is playing. Which brings me to my third point here. People don't usually lie because they're drowning in shame, okay? People lie because they want both worlds. They want to keep the security, the reputation, the admiration, and they want the forbidden fruit on the side. They don't want to sacrifice what would have to change if the truth came out. It's not guilt that drives the lie here. It's convenience very often, and we need to also talk about that. It's, I don't want to lose what I have, but I also want what I want.
And all three of you have been through 1,000 hours of journey, and holy and broken hallelujahs, have been madly committed to living with integrity and with kind of a radical authenticity and open, radical open hearts. It's like, oh my God, just crazy proud of you. And away we go.
Away we go.
Away we go.
I'm going to start the story,
Okay.
and I'm going to move to all of these stories. We'll keep a semblance of chronology here.
Let's try,
to tell the story.
Okay.
And the story really begins with me recognizing fundamentally that I was unwilling to actually be in deception. And that I had a thriving wild stallion of Eros that desired, different experiences, different...
Okay, just for us to be clear, the stallion of divine Eros or whatever, it's just called being horny, okay? You can learn to control it rather than go along with it like this dude is trying to put it. So let's just, demystify things and let's just call them with their normal names, if you will. Like, I don't want to offend anyone, but then again, divine Eros sounds in a way, and when I say just being horny, it sounds in another way. So,
So I'm in around 2013, I'm coupled with my partner at the time, Whitney Miller. And I'm starting to rise as the CEO of On It. I'm starting to get a platform. I'm starting to network with a lot of influential people and athletes. And I see that the majority of the men, which were mostly my friends, but also some of the women that I knew, were unfaithful.
Oh, excuse me, but what type of people are you surrounding yourself with? If I would have a circle of friends that are all cheaters, I would definitely look at myself and be like, what am I doing wrong? You know?
Not all of them, but so many of them were. And they would tell the stories of the stress that they would hold in their body, breaking out as psoriasis, breaking out as all of these neurological conditions to physiological conditions, and the stress of worried about whether they'd been caught or, so not only is it the selfish desire not to have to bear that burden, which I simply couldn't. I have a tendency towards far too much neurosis and also too deep a commitment to God. Every time I'm in a plant medicine journey, Mother Ayahuasca sits me down and lets me know every place that I've been out of integrity. So
okay.
It was not a possibility. So then I sat
that's
down
why it wasn't a possibility.
And I said,
okay.
Hey, Whitney, I love you, but I don't think I can do this monogamy thing. I want to try polyamory.
Okay.
And she was like, fuck off. I have no interest. And I was like, damn. All right, well, this path is true to me. And I want you to know it's totally fair. There's no special rights or privileges for me that are not granted to you. This is what I'm proposing. She's like, still, fuck off. And we separated for a few months. And I found a lover. And then we eventually got back together. And then we tried to make it work. And this journey was very public during those times.
Oh, really?
And I learned a lot. Learned a lot about jealousy. I learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work. But through this whole process, I was always honest. There was nothing that I ever did that wasn't in the clear light of day. Mm-hmm. And despite the conflict and the challenges that arose, it was honest. And I could live with that. Mm-hmm. And, there were other challenges, but there was something that was at peace in my heart.
Yep.
And I felt comfortable there. And that's during that period that I met Vylana. And Vylana, I'm with Whitney and I'm starting to dance with Vylana. And she's like, what the hell are you doing, bro? That's your girlfriend over there. We were at Burning Man. She didn't get it. And then we sat down in the RV and I explained, no, this is a different construct. It's called polyamory. Everything we're doing is blessed in the arrangement that we have.
Okay, just a sec. Why does it need to be blessed? Why instead we don't look at it as it's an agreed upon boundary or it's an established boundary? Why does it have to be blessed? But whatever, you know what? Maybe I'm just seeing manipulation everywhere at this point, but this type of spiritual talk is often used as a way to manipulate because, you make things sound bigger, you make them sound more important, you make them sound almost destiny-led, which just the vast majority of the time is just not the case, guys. I'm sorry to burst bubbles out there, but,
And, I kind of let her know without being too overt at that moment that I was quite interested. And she was also like, hey, fuck off. I'm not interested in being one of your girlfriends. I got main character energy. I got main chick energy here. So, I was like, damn, that's a bummer. And we've talked about this a little bit, but I was faced with this. I had a vision, well, if I got rid of everybody else, then potentially I could accelerate the possibility of being with Vylana because I felt this really strong.
Excuse me, but did he just say that, if I would get rid of everyone else, I could manipulate her into think that I could be more monogamous? Or am I just fooling myself into thinking I can be more monogamous simply because I want to get with this one chick? Is this what this dude is saying, man? Because...
urge and attraction and had mystical signs that came in, actually. We had an intimate encounter and a white star of light came in my third eye. And it was open-eyed, closed-eyed vision. I wasn't on any medicine. And
Okay,
it was like,
you don't need to be on any medicine to have this type of hallucination, if you want to call it, depending on where you are, depending on the type of people you're surrounded by, depending on many, many factors, including hydration even, okay? This is not necessarily a divine intervention. More often than not, there is an explanation from a biological perspective. But anyways, this is his experience and we need to treat it as such.
asterisk in this moment, and I was like, fuck. And then she coupled with somebody else, and I just remained friends with her and carried on with my polyamory journey. And eventually she uncoupled, and at the point that she uncoupled, then this was this huge kind of unkinking of a hose, and I was like, I'm all in. You know, it took me like a couple weeks.
I'm all in because I haven't fucked you yet and I just want to fuck you. I'm so sorry. You know, I just said respect his experience and then I go ahead and shit on him. So sorry. Okay, let's move on. That was just a joke. Everyone relax.
To propose after we gave some time and space for the uncoupling.
You proposed after a few weeks?
The boundaries of that, but we moved really, really fast. And
I would say alarmingly fast, guys, but okay, carry on.
That covenant was, hey, I'm still going to be interested in some sexual experiences. We'll do them together. But it was largely under the auspices of monogamy with some exceptions. And Vi was exploring her comfortability with those, and she'd had some experiences with multiple partners and had a little bit of that. And so she was cautiously open, I would say. I don't know if that would be fair, but cautiously open. But it was kind of on the table. But it wasn't.
I don't want to generalize here, but in my experience, at least, very often when I'm talking with women that have explored polyamory or, any type of arrangement that includes multiple people, I'm not saying that this is a rule, but I have seen a pattern there where many women just don't feel like they will ever be able to find a man that is going to devote to them. So it's like, it's kind of like this idea of I am not going to find what I want anyway, so I might as well just settle for the next best thing. So that's kind of, I'm not saying that this is what is happening here. I am just saying what I have noticed in my sessions, in my work with the clients that I have seen in establishing this pattern. Okay.
Idea of pretty much classical monogamy with a little bit of play.
Threesomes.
Right? So then we start off and it's this wild and passionate love affair, of course, bringing things up for us as we've made this leap of commitment and got married by Elvis, and so much love
like
and passion
Vegas.
And so much beauty that's come in, and we start the process of exploring. And that exploring, certainly brought up a lot of different things for you. And I'd love for you now to pass it over for you to start telling the story here from your perspective, because particularly, as Marc was saying, you had never really experienced a relationship that was in truth and integrity all the way.
Okay, well, before we go to her, let's talk about him real quick. So let me get this straight. This man starts becoming successful and he looks around at the people in his new circle and realizes that the majority of them are cheating on their partners. They're lying, they're hiding, they're living double lives. Now, here's the interesting part. Instead of concluding, wow, maybe I need to surround myself with more honest people, he decides, well, I guess monogamy just doesn't work because I too am very horny. Sure, you can say it's a spiritual download or whatnot, but we call it confirmation bias in psychology mixed with some moral outsourcing, I guess. In IFS terms, we'd say that there's a protector part in him, and this part very clearly doesn't want him to feel shame. It doesn't want him to touch the part of him that might be impulsive, that might be restless or lust-driven, or God forbid, emotionally immature. So he rationalizes this whole thing by wrapping it in spiritual language. So lust becomes divine eros, avoidance becomes evolution, and inconsistency becomes being expensive, I think. Do we see a pattern here? One of the most concerning things here is that he's using, consciously or not again, a tactic called unfalsifiability. It's when someone uses beliefs or claims that can't be possibly tested, they can't be disproved, and therefore they can't be challenged. He is building a fortress made of mystical insulation, the type you can't argue with, because what are you going to say to someone who claims God told me to do this, or ayahuasca confirmed my truth, the white star of light in my third eye said yes? How do you even challenge something like that? There's no proof, there's no entry point. It's basically the spiritual equivalent of mom told me it's okay. In debate theory, this is considered a conversation ender, and not because they're right, because he absolutely is not, don't ever believe that, but because there's no rational way forward from there. This is where we need to address the elephant in the room. Someone who's using this type of tactic can't invite you in intimacy, can't invite you in safety. They can only invite you into their own illusion. One you're not allowed to question without being labeled, closed-minded or unevolved or whatever else they might call you. Now, to be fair with you, I've had people do this in sessions with me. I've had people invoke gods, guides, spirit animals, past lives, all to justify behaviors or choices that were harming their partners or themselves. And I always say the same thing to these people. That's interesting, but my God doesn't allow me to believe your God. So let's come back down and let's talk among humans. If Aubrey ever had to sit down, really sit down, without any reality enhancers, if you will, he'd have to face the reality that parts of him are out of control, that he might be afraid of limits, that he wants to be worshipped by many while being kept by one, that his eros has less to do with divine and more to do with a lack of discipline and self-control. Basically, the whole narrative would crack if he would ever do that. He wouldn't be a mystic or a visionary anymore. He would be just another guy trying to spiritualize lust and impulse into something that looks like truth or divine. To be honest, quite boring. We have seen that before. Any cult leader does that. Not accusing him of trying to do it, but the psychology is there in the end.
So go through kind of what those early days were like, leading up, of course, to the moment where Alana enters the scene, and then we'll hear Alana's story that'll bring us up to present, and we'll kind of tell the story, the most interesting part of the story of how we figured out what this was and what spirit was trying to communicate to us.
Okay, he's either very clear or very controlling, I don't know.
I don't want to get too far into my history, but my history was the 70% of deception and shame and lying and betrayal. So my, physical body has had a whole lifetime of a lot of trauma around that particular, like a lot of things in relationship, like there being something that was hidden. Right. There's always something that was hidden, like there would be, I would feel like this was a beautiful relationship and we're deeply in love and all these things. And then there was like something that would just come out of left field and just like totally take my legs out from under me because there was something.
So, I'm going to pause it there a little bit because we are very much downplaying the impact of betrayal, the impact of cheating, of lying. And that can be a very traumatic experience depending on how it's lived and depending on the context at play. But lying and people deceiving each other, it's not supposed to be something normal, by the way. Okay, just to be clear.
And so I stepped into our relationship, knowing the sensitivity around like my animal body and my desire at that point to just really desiring to feel a sense of safety. I'd never known safety and stability and in some ways just feeling like radically chosen by somebody. And so entering into it, like that was our agreement. It was, I guess, monogamish, you could call it. We didn't have, Marc here to kind of help walk us through and help us to see alternate, possibilities and also just create the structure that creates, a lot of the safety. And so we were sort of just, trusting in ourselves and what the journey felt like for me was feeling you in your desire and really wanting to find the place within myself where I could meet you in that desire, not from a place of me like submitting to you, but how can I actually be on the inside with you? And so a lot of those earlier experiences that we had, I mean, our whole relationship has felt like me just pressing edge, like pressing, okay, here's my edge, all right, okay, then I'm good here, and then like, okay, here's my next fucking edge. And it's just like a constant pressing forward into...
Okay, just FYI, that is not very good, okay? I don't have a lot of context about that when she says it, but it just... It doesn't sound good in any capacity, to be honest with you. But, let me hear her out first and let's talk later.
Really showing me a lot of the places where I've not been free because I've been so driven by fear. I think we have a choice when we're in fear. It's like you can try to control and contain to feel safe, but how alive is that relationship really?
Okay, to feel safe, you don't have to control. By the way, to feel safe, you just need to put boundaries. And in case people are not respecting them, you are going to remove yourself from the situation, or any other type of boundary that you find appropriate in the moment. And it seems that she has a very type of confused speech in this way. She wants safety, but then again, she talks about control when talking about safety. So is she trying to tell us that she has found freedom because she finally doesn't seek control when wanting safety? Because in this case, that does sound like submission to me. Okay. But then again, I would need to ask many, many questions to her specifically to assess it properly.
And so what I felt like I've always been left with you is like I want you to feel like you can be yourself. I want you to feel like you can be loved and being all of who you are. And that choice, and me, willing that choice has meant a lot of shedding and dying for me, of like my stories of comparison or competition, or now if you look at them that way, am I not as important? Like that, it's just like all of those things that can arise, and just feeling the thing that the person that you love the most placing their attention on something else, like it brings up a lot of stuff. So it's, even our journey in the exploration, like there's been so much beauty, like, and that's what I really carry with me. But it's felt, it's like a diamond that's been constantly forged over and over and over and over through the fire. But the fire is the truth.
Oh my God,
the
language of this woman.
Paradox that I'm actually the most safe because there is nothing hiding in the shadows that's left to bite me. And now that doesn't make it easy,
Oh my
and
God.
we'll continue to progress through the story. But like, it's been the most difficult initiation of my whole life, like by far, and the most rewarding, and the deepest love, and the deepest intimacy, and ultimately what I can feel over and over again when I'm in the choosing of this love, and the loving you in the way that you deserve to be loved, because you really love me in that way. I found that through every death, there comes so much freedom, because there's not a lot that I'm afraid of anymore. And I think that understanding of it's so nuanced and it's so complex. It's like the intimacy and aliveness just gets like wider, which sometimes it's so hard. And sometimes most of the time it's radically beautiful. But through all of those moments, our love like deepens and roots. It's like our love is like an oak tree, and those roots are so deep down into the earth that like we know the insides of each other. We're honest about everything. We're honest about every desire, any fantasy, any challenge that we have in perspective, like whatever it is. It's like our relationship is so rooted in truth, and that's the life that I want to live. So that was my experience leading up.
I mean, truth is a tricky one because, you can be like, hey, I'm going through this thing that is very hard and, I'm going to figure it out, come to you when I will figure it out. And that means being honest. Another thing is like, you know what, you look very fat in that dress. You know what I mean? There is a bit of a difference between being honest and being considerate, and you can be both at the same time. Yet it seems from her language that she has been through so much already that is like, whatever else you're going to throw at me, I think I got it. But, that is the language of a survivor. And not even a survivor, because you still have to subject yourself to the same treatment over and over again. It's more like some sort of romanticized torture at this time. I don't know. Wow.
Alana making her way into our life, it's been a wild journey, and I've died so many times I can't even count. It's just hundreds and hundreds, but ultimately, to kind of like bring us to that point, that's what I'd say.
Even before we get to Alana, which is entering stage left in a second, you said one sentence, which I just want to reflect back. It was a passing sentence, but it was so important. You said to Ab, you said, I wanted to meet your desire and to love you the way you deserve to be loved. And then you added a really critical sentence, which was, because you've loved me in that way. And I want to just really just to hear that, right? That actually you're wanting to meet your man in the depth of his desire because you feel he's meeting you in the depth of your desire.
Okay, he's trying right here to convince the audience to a certain degree that because she has said those words, no takesies backsies, you have said that he loves you exactly in the way that you want, so now you have nothing to complain. You hear the subtext there. It's almost as if he's trying to underline the fact that this is a situation where he is able to fulfill her, but she's not able to fulfill him. Do you hear that?
And so it's not a model of, how can we please the man?
Yeah.
It's how do we please the beloveds?
And it's
who are madly pleased.
Yeah, and it's also not like an equal, like I haven't had a natural inclination towards desiring other men. That's not really been true for me. So it's also not an equal, like you give me this, and it's not like this there's a reciprocity of energy in the ways that he loves me is different, and I've had to kind of overcome these things in my mind of feeling like this should be equal, because if I give this, and I think that I think a lot of relationships get stuck in that. It's like, what do I get? Which was a frame that was really helpful that, you've offered to me. And
okay, before we move any further, there is nothing wrong with wondering what do you get out of a relationship, because even though we love to romanticize love and it's like, we love each other unconditionally, such a thing doesn't exist. It's hard to find even in the people that should have that, which is your parents, but to expect it outside of the nucleus of the family, to me, it's just simply unrealistic. Okay, therefore, if you want to have a healthy relationship, you need to ask yourself this question: what exactly is this relationship bringing me? Is it bringing me destruction, or is it bringing me more alignment with myself? You know what I mean? And at times, like in this case, it could be that it's kind of both, and it's hard to make a difference perhaps, or unblur the lines. And that's where, couples therapy, individual therapy, any sort of therapy can definitely help. Okay.
So just want to give the context that, we started working with Marc as our teacher to learn Dharma, and then, found ourselves with you being the main person that we come to whenever we have struggles in our relationship. When Alana came into the picture, like, you have been such a necessary anchor to us being able to sit here right now. So in the same way, just really wanting to like honor and recognize, like, there's no, I cannot see a way that we could be sitting here right now without you.
Okay, that can be a great thing, or that can be a terrifying thing. On one hand, it can be, oh my God, you're such a great professional and you helped us navigate everything. Or on the other hand, can be, you actually just provided the very toxic structure I'm trying to fit in. So, you know what? Let's talk about Vylana real quick. So Vylana said something that really caught my attention here. She says that what made this new relationship feel safe was the fact that there was no longer anything being hidden. Now, let's pause for a second, everyone, because this is where the first red flag slaps you in the face. I don't know if you felt it. I did. Let me be very loud and clear about this one, okay? Absence of deception does not equal safety. Psychologically, safety in a relationship means predictability. It means consistency, boundaries, emotional attunement, mutual regulation. What V describes, on the other hand, is constant destabilization. In her own words, our whole relationship has felt like me just pressing, edge after edge, and she romanticizes it. She calls it beautiful, forging herself like a diamond in the fire. But there's another term for that. It's called emotional flooding. That's what we call repeated overexposure to boundary rupture. This is nervous system dysregulation through chronic threshold testing. It's when someone's constantly put in situations that outpace their capacity to cope, but they don't step back. Instead, they adapt, they override again and again and again and again. And I am exhausted only talking about it, to be honest. I cannot even imagine how she feels. This is where it gets dangerous, everyone. When you've been betrayed in the past, it's not uncommon to start redefining safety as anything that doesn't look like your trauma. You might say, well, at least he's not lying, but that's a very low bar, okay? You're essentially just looking for the absence of harm, not safety, and they're not the same thing in the end. That's when we can call it with the right name. This is settling, not safety. V says she wants to meet Aubrey in his desire because he meets her in hers. And yes, reciprocity is beautiful when it's chosen freely, if it makes sense. But in this case, her own words betray her. She says she's had to die hundreds of times, which is often the language of someone that had to go through emotional contortion. It doesn't say, I've grown into myself. It says, I've broken and rebuilt myself so many times just to stay here. And almost as proof of that, she admits that she doesn't actually desire other men. Like, that doesn't just happen naturally. So this is one person adjusting to another person's desire so she doesn't get left behind. That is my opinion. Now, let me be very clear with everyone here. Growth in relationships is important, but growth requires safety, and it also requires defining one's own pacing. It doesn't look like someone constantly pressing your edge so you'll eventually collapse into their mold. That's trauma bonding, and it doesn't matter how many shedding of yourself you have to meet someone else's needs, because it can never lead to empowerment. That's why she's hesitant overall, because trauma bonding leads to identity erosion in time, and the nervous system will eventually confuse chaos with passion, pain with progress, survival with love. Why not? That can happen. So when she says it's been the most difficult initiation of my life, but the most rewarding, we have to be very careful with that, because there's a difference between a love that challenges you to rise and the love that exhausts you into submission. And I know that she doesn't like that word. She said that, but unfortunately, there's no other word. There's even a moment where she says she craved safety and stability, but then she herself is like, well, if you focus so much on having safety, how alive are you? Yeah, you can hear it in her language. There's no room for rest. Like, she's always just barely keeping up. Like, love is something she has to earn by sacrificing her comfort over and over again. And there's a bittersweet flavor in her voice. The way she breaks down crying while saying she found freedom. Gosh, I'm sorry to ruin things, but that's not necessarily love. That's what psychologists would call cognitive dissonance resolution. It's the relief you feel when your brain finally finds a story that makes all the pain make sense. But it doesn't make the story true. It just allows for your brain to rest for a second. Listen, for everyone watching, even V, if she ever sees this, if your boundaries are constantly crossed under the illusion of growth, it will lead you to learned helplessness, this state where you no longer trust your own limits because you've been taught that love means abandoning them, or as they call it, overcoming them. And I am very wary of using overcoming when your only option to be with this person is to break yourself to match their desire. This is more in line with spiritualized self-abandonment.
We've all been together, just so beautiful. And I know you're about to unfold, and we're going to unfold the next step. I just want to just reflect back that last sentence again. So you made this great distinction, right, Alana, which was, so it's not that it's like quid pro quo. Mm-hmm. And we all have this like list, right? I remember when I got bar mitzvah, it's like a lot of bar, not so much mitzvah, but anyways, everyone was getting presents, right? And you got like these people gave us a $7 present, and these people a $15 present, and my parents had a big list, and you checked off, and then when you went to their bar mitzvah...
Okay, if he's trying to draw a parallel between this type of behavior in a relationship, this is a false equivalency. They're not the same thing, therefore they're not supposed to be treated in the same way. It's kind of like, you know, the logical fallacy in the lock and key analogy. Again, they're not the same thing, therefore they cannot work in the same way, right? But anyway.
Sure, you gave, okay, the exchange present. So it's not that, right? It's not this kind of quid pro quo. It's that Obbs is pouring into you in 1,000 ways, and you're pouring into him in 1,000 ways, and they're not always the same ways. But I love the phrase, in the reciprocity of energies, in 1,000 different ways of exchanging, there's the sense of deep mutuality and wholeness. Is that fair?
Yeah.
That's integrity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we go to the quid pro quo discussion. Listen, I agree with some of the points here, but there's just too much romanticizing, okay? What I'm seeing here beyond the rituals and the spiritual talk is a woman who's being partially fulfilled, and the system around that convinces her that partial is sacred and that the parts of her that still hurt are just, you know, things she needs to overcome. Hell to the no. Let's talk about quid pro quo for a second, because they treat it like it's some unevolved concept or like an insult or something. Like love should flow freely with no expectations and no needs and no accounting, right? Quid pro quo isn't a demon, guys. It's a diagnostic tool more often than not. It's how we assess whether a relationship is mutually nourishing. In fact, you might be shocked to hear that therapists often track how energy, care, effort, and emotional labor are exchanged in a relationship to determine whether it's healthy or subtly exploitative. Let me give you some examples. So if there's a discrepancy in emotional labor, or if there's too much one-sided compromise, if there's sexual reciprocity, if there's visible praise for invisible support, if there's growth asymmetry, and so on and so forth, who's giving, who's receiving, and does it feel fair? And I don't mean identical, I mean mutual. All of those are questions that mental health professionals are going to ask you in one form or another. Now, I understand not all giving looks the same. Sure, we can definitely agree on that. But if one person is giving up boundaries, maybe self-trust, emotional stability, just to meet someone else's desire, we need to call it by its name. Imbalance. Most specifically, this is partial fulfillment. I feel like I'm witnessing a woman who says she feels loved and chosen, but she's also continuously asked to give up parts of her human experience, basically, like jealousy, you know, like maybe the longing for devotion. And I see that this is accomplished by demonizing some very normal and useful emotions here. Because she keeps talking about her feelings of comparison even and so on as if they're shadows she's learning to transcend. But there needs to be a distinction here, okay? While it is true that we need to make sure these parts of us don't control us, that we don't react from them, right? We're also supposed to integrate them, not get rid of them. They're not flaws, they're not wounds, they are messengers, and you need to treat them like such. They're here to tell you something in this dynamic doesn't feel aligned, okay? Maybe I'm not getting what I need, or maybe this doesn't feel fair, or maybe it doesn't feel reciprocal, or maybe this feels rushed. They're all supposed to be very valid. Okay. Now, here's where we all can learn from this. If you start treating these messengers like problems you gotta fix, you'll stop listening to yourself. To me, Vylana might have to admit she's not radically sovereign. She's performing spiritual worthiness to avoid abandonment, believing that if she's open enough, she'll finally be safe. But I don't know if I can agree with that. And of course, this is just my opinion on her.
You know, there's been many private moments that I've had with Alana where Vylana and I were in some form of conflict, and we're in the tragic, and the tragic, all things are on the table, there's questions. And to understand that from a selfish perspective, right, the idea of us being able to share a bed every night, I mean, you have strong sugar glider energy. Like, you really like a good cuddle. Like, really do.
I do.
And so all of the selfish desire would be to say, like, yeah, maybe it's not going to work with Bi. But for you to have never once taken that road or even hinted at it is like a shocking testament to a purity that is...
Excuse me?
It's really like transcendent of what I've known in the world. And that purity that is a part of your essential quality. I was just talking with Mark about this in the car, is like people who, if you don't have an experience of purity, you don't know what you're fighting for in the world. You know, and we all have our purity in our different forms.
Okay, that you don't need purity to have something to fight for. You need purpose, and that is regardless of whatever level of purity on whatever scale we are measuring it on. This is, until now I can tell that there were times where I would definitely see how can someone be confused, how can someone misunderstand some of the things that are happening to them. But right now, this is the only time where I feel like, does this have an agenda? It's weird.
And, Vylana and I...
We're not, I mean,
We have it
we're like,
in our different
we're like two sides of the same coin, which is like awesome and crazy.
A little bit of good, a little bit of bad.
A little bit good, a little bit bad.
But the goodness and purity that you've maintained through this process is like, it's really been absolutely stunning and exceptional, and been such a blessing, and it's such a blessing to now be able to share you on this world stage as an archetype, and not to reduce you to a single archetype, but the archetype of purity. And that's like, there's just something so potent about that, which was also an aspect of this that was like, it evokes something that's very important, I think, particularly in the masculine.
Oh my
It's
God.
like, in the purity of the world is what evokes the warrior, the protector, the one that says, this
The
world...
purity of the world is not pure, okay? And there's a testament to that. If you look everywhere in nature, you're going to see nature is pretty cruel. It's a live or die kind of world out there. There's no fucking purity any fucking where. So whatever this person is talking about, it doesn't really exist in reality. You fight for things that are important to you. Okay? That's really it.
Die for this world. And every movie shows that. The bad guys kill the pure one, whether it's Murren and Braveheart or whatever. It's like, you done fucked up. There was purity and you took it, and now my life doesn't matter anymore.
Okay, are we talking about like there is purity and you took it? These people literally liberated their countries. It was also for them. So let's not try to put this idea of, oh, I'm fighting for someone else. You're fighting first and foremost for yourself. Okay, not for purity or whatever else. It's your own principles and values. And if you value purity, that, my man, to me, is a bit of a red flag, depending on what you mean with it.
What matters is my commitment to the purity of she, ultimately. And it's not just in one person, can't be reduced. It's spread all around, but to have the visceral contact with that purity, it's what causes the sword to gleam respect.
Listen, if you want to have contact with purity, how about you volunteer and help children, or volunteer to help perhaps people that are in need, and that's how you come in contact with purity. Not whatever my dick tells me that you are pure, so that must be purity, and I'm going to burn the world for you. That's a bit like book talk toxic, and sorry, but no.
And for the warrior to smile and say, like, like, I'm ready for whatever's next.
So let's go and talk about Alana, the last piece of this triangle. Aubrey literally says, I don't want to reduce you to an archetype, and then proceeds to reduce Alana to an archetype. Like, not just any archetype, by the way, purity, which might sound poetic until, we actually listen to what this means. It's almost as if he's praising her for being soft and cuddly and non-disruptive, for never taking the selfish route, for never making things harder when he and Vylana were in conflict, apparently. In other words, he is praising her for not rocking the boat. Very unspiritual of me, but I hope you'll forgive me. Now, this is where we see how dangerous this dynamic really is. He says her purity is what activates this protector in him. And I need you to pause here and really hear this. Are we implying that only purity deserves protection or the activation of said protector? Because apparently that's what triggers it, right? Which is also another bullshit story. You either are a protector or you're monetizing your protection, which, just makes you a freelancer in that case. But to now somehow imply you need to be activated? Oh, come on. Mothers, for instance, when they protect their children, have no activation. When you love someone, regardless of who you are and what gender you have, you'll want to protect them, no matter what. They don't have to be pure, or this is some deep-rooted patriarchal messaging, if you ask me. Because if protection is reserved only for those who are soft, selfless, non-threatening, and so on, what happens to the rest? It's almost as if we punish them for not pleasing. Very, very dangerous behavior, if you ask me. And then again, this is exactly how purity becomes currency. If you act the way the system wants you, you get safety. But if you deviate, you get abandoned, you get punished, or labeled difficult. And that, my friends, is called behavioral conditioning. No matter how they try to dress this up as spiritual language, okay? Plus, let's again go through, what does purity even mean here? Does it mean being younger, less traumatized, with less baggage, easier to mold, less exhausted of someone continuously pushing their boundaries? He never talks about Alana's strength. He paints her as this cuddly little ball of joy, almost in the same way I talk about my dog. In my professional opinion, Alana is not being seen in her full humanity. She's being used as a symbol, a narrative device of some sort to reinforce the illusion that this dynamic is sacred after all. But they're all fooling themselves and each other at the same time, and they're also trying to fool us. Alana is not the catalyst, she's the glue. She's the one absorbing the emotional chaos between Aubrey and Vylana. She's the one staying small, soft, spiritually agreeable, if you will, and that emotional labor is being called purity. It's almost astonishing how much manipulation can be dressed in spiritual silk and presented with a halo. Like, let's just imagine being Vylana in that moment, sitting next to your husband, I think, hearing him describe another woman as someone who evokes the protector, as someone who embodies purity, who has maintained this stunning, exceptional, transcendent energy that calls forward the divine masculine. Wow, that's a mouthful. And I just wonder, is this what she's supposed to overcome? The part of her that wants to be chosen fully? The part that wants devotion, romantic awe, a partner who speaks about her with the same depth, perhaps? Because also, another very interesting thing, if you actually listen closely, the most beautiful words in this entire podcast are reserved not for the wife, but for Alana, the new addition, if you will. The shiny new toy. Follow me here. When Aubrey talks about Alana, he uses language like a shocking testament to purity. Absolutely stunning, exceptional, the archetype of what evokes the protector, the divine, that evoke whatever, visceral contact with that purity that makes the sword gleam. Like, these are big words. So let's compare it with the language around Vylana. We were in conflict. We had to alchemize jealousy and insecurity. We had to die many deaths, constantly pressed edge after edge, forged by fire. Do you hear it? One is described as divinely inspiring. The other, as if she's a project of ongoing emotional maintenance. And look, this isn't just semantics at the end of the day. In psychology, words reveal power dynamics. And this is when we need to go a little bit clinical. They seem to be inside of what's classically called the drama triangle, a relational framework developed by the psychologist Stephen Karpman. Actually, this triangle is usually called the Karpman triangle. It has three main roles: the victim, the abuser, and the savior, but not always in the literal sense. More in the emotional and symbolic roles each person unconsciously steps into. In this case, Vylana is placed in the victim role, not because she is a victim in the traditional sense of the word, rather because she is subjected to constantly being tested, cracked open, transformed. Her pain is framed as sacred, but still, it's pain. She's always in the process of becoming. She can never just be, because the moment she tries to just be, there's another challenge that Aubrey throws at her. So of course, by logic, Aubrey steps into the role of the abuser. Now, again, not in the traditional sense, I just mean that he is the one setting this entire system in motion. He's the one that's destabilizing boundaries, romanticizing V's emotional contortion as growth, and spiritualizing his own avoidance. And you know, the fact he can just shift the rules and frame it as just spiritual guidance is what's really abusive here, and what actually indicates how much control he really has in this dynamic. Now, it may sound untrue, but he himself might not be completely aware of the role that he's playing, like the rest of its participants, of course. This is what makes this triangle extremely complex. None of its participants are aware that this is happening. Now, Alana, of course, is the savior, simply because Aubrey established it already. Her presence is the one that stabilizes the narrative, right? She's the soothing, symbolic ideal, the muse, the embodiment of purity that activates Aubrey's protector. Sorry, that one really made me laugh. She doesn't really challenge the system. She validates it. She's all in, which is also confirmed by her answer to Aubrey on the Raya app, you know? And in doing all of that, she becomes the emotional balm that makes the dysfunction look sacred. Her calmness saves the others from having to face the chaos, basically. Because if we eliminate her, basically this is just a couple that is exploring polyamory. Nothing more, nothing less. So it's a spiritualized triangle of dysfunction. And the reason it's so seductive, it's because all three roles feel meaningful. And if there's one thing that the human being loves, is to feel needed. So it's not only meaningful, actually, it's sacred. However, in this model, no one is actually relating. They're just playing roles, you see. The victim feels powerless, but can't show it. The savior feels responsible, but she takes it upon herself as her divine duty and purpose. And the abuser is stripped of any responsibility whatsoever, because everything he wants and does is sacred, apparently, because he said so. It's not the first time I see something like this, okay? This is role-based intimacy, and trust me, sooner or later it will always collapse under the weight of, you know, real human needs. Now, if there's one thing this story teaches us, is that love doesn't need a TED talk to be justified. Aubrey built a narrative that is convenient, sure, and a narrative that also needs support, which I guess is why Marc is there to begin with. I don't know. Which, by the way, oh my God, that whole relationship and dynamic, how entangled they are with their therapist, I guess, or whatever he is to them, is just, well, it's just weird to me, but hey, I don't know enough about them to have an opinion that can resemble objectivity, right? Maybe just that it's healthy to make sure there's no enmeshment with your mental health professional. Like, sure, you can be nice and cordial and you can joke around throughout the sessions. Of course, we're all humans, but there needs to be clear boundaries, and usually established by the mental health professional. But what am I even saying here? So here's a question for you. What archetype do you perform in relationships to be safe, adored, or indispensable? Are you embodying the cool girl, the healer, the saint, the visionary? Maybe the one who needs to be right so badly they spiritualize their own avoidance. I don't know. Remember, if your relationship needs a third person to keep it from collapsing, it's not a sacred union, okay? It's a house of cards. And you deserve love that doesn't ask you to split the love. Stay golden, guys.